We have a card at the Apex. Now, Danny, the UFC has been doing something a little bit interesting as things have changed and the world begins to open back up and the UFC goes on the road a little bit more, right? They're not just going on the road for pay-per-views. They're now going on the road for fight nights. They were in, of course, Texas. They were in Long Island. They'll be in some other places soon. They're going to be in San Diego for the Chito Vera fight. What's ending up happening is that the Apex is still a valuable place for them, but it'd be hard to argue that the UFC is reserving their best fights for the Apex, all things being what they are. You do have a decent main event. We're going to talk about it in just a second between Jamal Hill and Thiago Santos. Nevertheless, what is your assessment of how the UFC has treated the Apex of late? The card quality there, the card quality this weekend. What is your view about how all of that has sort of created a tiered system of content?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we are seeing this is because clearly the cards on the road are better. And a lot of people are attributing it to like the crowd. And I think obviously it plays a factor into the fights being better, the fighters getting amped up and all that. But if you just look at the cards on paper, the cards outside of the Apex are just much better. And one of the reasons is because at the Apex, the UFC doesn't have to sell tickets. So I don't think that this card, in all the respect to all the fighters competing at this upcoming card this Saturday, I don't think you can put that on the road and sell out. So you do have to, put a little bit of muscle in those cards that are on the road because tickets are a big part of it. So what happens is that for the shows that are at the Apex, we're now seeing, the UFC not really put as much emphasis in those cards. So if it's already an Apex card, you know that, okay, main event, co-main event are going to be good. But then below that, there might be a few gems here and there, but more or less, it's not going to be a very strong card. So I think that's the biggest thing. I think ticket sales influence the UFC into actually putting more muscle into these cards. So I love the UFC on the road just because it guarantees us a better event, but I don't really dig too much of the UFC Apex, to be honest, but it does serve a purpose nowadays with so many cards, with so many fighters on the roster who they have to give fights to. This is a good avenue to sort of keep the machine rolling.
Yeah, people complain about the Apex like it's the Apex by itself that's the problem, but I didn't mind the quiet fights with not much of a crowd during the middle of the pandemic. To me, I don't mind the Apex. What I mind is that if you're going to give all of the very best stuff to your pay-per-view, and then some really good stuff to the fight nights, there's just not going to be, on the road, there's just not going to be much left. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about this main event, Danny. Thiago Santos in a 205-pound main event against Jamal Hill. Jamal Hill on a 2-fight win streak. Thiago Santos having lost 3 of his last 4. The last loss to Ankalaev was thorough, but boring. I think most folks would say there just wasn't much action. He did have a win before that against Johnny Walker, but since the fight to John Jones and the time off and the surgery and everything else, hard to argue he's exactly the same as he was before. In fact, he's a pretty big difference. Size up this contest for me. What do you see as the most relevant way to look at this fight?
Yeah, I think Jamal Hill is a pretty interesting guy in the division. I think Thiago Santos I agree with you, he hasn't looked great since the John Jones defeat. Obviously, he has some really bad knee injuries that he had to take time off, but he hasn't been the same. He just doesn't fight with the same level of activity, doesn't fight with the same level of meanness. So I think this is kind of setting up Jamal Hill to become an exciting contender at 205. If he's able to pick up a good victory here, and remember, he had that crazy knockout win over Johnny Walker not so long ago. I mean, what the 205 division needs right now is names and top contenders. So I feel like this is a great opportunity, main event against a former title challenger, to sort of kind of propel Jamal Hill into that conversation and have him, be set up for future bigger bouts here in the division. So that's kind of what I see here. I think this is Jamal Hill's opportunity to sort of go beyond just being an exciting fighter that gets good finishes here and there and actually become a contender and become a threat in the division and somebody that we start talking about as a potential future title challenger.
Thiago Santos currently sitting at age 38. He'll be 39 in January, so he's sort of halfway through it there, give or take. Not quite, a little bit longer actually. Jamal Hill just turned 31 in May. What is your view of the upside of Jamal Hill? You kind of got to it. Since he joined the UFC, he won on the Contender Series. He had the no contest to Klidson Abreu, which was originally a TKO Hill for win, overturned after he tested positive for marijuana, which is obviously bullshit. We can be honest about that. Follows it up with the Ovin St. Preux win. He did lose to Paul Craig. He got finished inside the first to Paul Craig, but then rebounded with stoppage wins in the first round himself against Jimmy Crute and Johnny Walker. What? Great hand speed, good boxing, but to your point, as good as he's looked, maybe there's still definitely some, not questions, but there's further challenges to answer before we get a more complete picture.
Yeah, for sure. And before we talk about how BS is the whole no contest for marijuana, I know we've talked about this, media has just talked about it for many years, but now that the Nevada Athletic Commission made it, I guess they don't test for marijuana anymore. Shouldn't they go back and give all these guys that got their wins overturned to a no contest? Shouldn't they get their wins back? Because they're not testing for it anymore, and they're saying it's cool. So, what's going on there?
Yeah, they should. It's fucking bullshit that they ever did it to begin with. They don't have any way to know if he was actually feeling the euphoric effects of it during the time of the bout of the fight itself. So no, the commission's fucking blow. We know this. Yeah,
it's ridiculous. But to your point, I agree. Good hand speed, good boxing. I think he's a little bit green. He needs a little bit more experience. Jamal Hill, obviously, he's just 12 fights into his MMA career, so understandably so. But this is a guy that, again, needs experience, and I feel like above everything, he needs victories over guys that have name value for confidence and also just to kind of beef up the record and the resume. And I think this Thiago Santos fight is a great next step. I really like this matchup for Jamal Hill. And we'll see how this guy evolves. He's 31. We know that light heavyweights or heavyweights usually tend to have longer careers. Usually they get into their primes a little bit later into their careers compared to lighter weight classes. So I think at 31, considering he doesn't have a ton of experience, I think there's still a lot for Jamal Hill to gain here and to evolve. So as of now, I'm not screaming, hey, this guy's title contender, this guy's a threat, but who knows? Let's wait and see what happens to Thiago Santos. Maybe he makes a statement here. And, fighters can evolve greatly in between fights. So he certainly has a lot to work with in terms of his athletic ability, hand speed, power. He just has to add a few things technically, I think, and he's up there, man.
Yeah, in fact, if you look at the rankings, which was probably a big driver in how this fight got made, currently, at the time of the broadcast, Jamal Hill sits at 10, which seems about right. Thiago Santos sitting at 6. Now, what's interesting is that Paul Craig is sitting at 9. Craig has a stoppage win over Hill. But my guess is that what they're looking to do is they want to get some fresh contenders in there, because if you look at 6 to 10, it goes something like this. 6 is Thiago Santos, who's had a title shot and I think is on the downside of his career. Could be wrong, which isn't to say he can't win on Saturday. That's not what I mean. Right. But his best wins are probably behind him, is what I think. Dominic Reyes sitting at 7. Not sure what to do with him. Already had a title shot. Actually, a couple of them. 8, Volkan Oezdemir. Got a nice win over Paul Craig sitting at 9. But again, Oezdemir already had a title shot. Craig is sitting at 9, then you have Jamal Hill at 10. To your point, Jamal Hill doesn't have the same experience as those guys. With a win over Santos, I don't know if he'll take the number 6 spot, but it puts some new life into the top of that division. With the exception, Danny, of Jan Blachowicz sitting at 2, 1 to 5 is Teixeira, Ankalaev, Rakic, and Smith. So Smith's had a title shot. Teixeira, the former champion. It's Teixeira, Blachowicz. Yeah, they're trying to get some new blood in there is the basic idea. They're trying to shuffle some new life into there. Jamal Hill at 31, one of the younger guys given that position. It put him just outside the top 5-ish in that space. Conversely, if Santos gets a win, to me, this would be his most validating one. Johnny Walker sitting at 13. If he could beat like a surging, let's put it that way, semi-surging Jamal Hill, that would shut up doubters like potentially you and me or somebody else out there who thinks, oh, well, he can't, this is the end of it. It would be a real validating moment to keep his spot hovering on the outside of that top 5, basically.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's what it is. He's looking to prove that he belongs in that spot at number 6, because right now, Thiago Santos' career, as you mentioned, is a bit on a downfall. He doesn't look to be the same fighter that he once was. But if he loses to Jamal Hill, I think that's a clear indication like, hey, his better days are over, because that's a different type of defeat, a different type of loss. So this is very much guarding his spot and guarding. I'm not saying he's going to become a title contender with this win, but guarding, that spot that like, hey, I'm here to compete and I'm still among the top 10 in the world. Look at this guy that was coming up that was ranked at 10. He couldn't get by me. Give me a big fight in the future. And for Jamahal Hill is that I think if you beat him, you get a former title challenger in your record. A lot of people saw him beat John Jones. I think this opens the doors for the top 5, and all of a sudden we're going to start seeing him in meaningful bouts that could have big consequences at 205 for sure.
No doubt about it. Yeah, somebody who's not title shot ready, but top contender fight ready.
Oh, yeah.
Is the way I would put that.